Frieren Beyond Journey's End is, in my humble opinion, the best anime of 2023, and probably the best anime for several years before that. The simple reason for this is that it's an amazing show. The complicated reason for this is because of the content of the narrative, the characters that act that narrative out, and the skill upon which the creators of not just the original material, but also this adaptation have called upon to make this masterpiece. There are many places where things can go wrong in an adaptation like this, and even the best masterpieces have subtle flaws in them if you care to look closely enough in just the right place. But Frieren has so much polish to it that even the flaws seem to have been coated over and been made to shine. Today I wanted to talk about many of these aspects to the series that made it great. I wanted to talk about them before the series has even ended, because yes, as of the writing and filming of this video, there are still several weeks to go, but that doesn't matter right now. The series may crash and burn in the final moments, such that I will regret waxing poetic so much about it in this intro, but heck, even if it does, I can still take pride in speaking so highly about it in the moments just before it gets too close to the sun of greatness and, like Icarus, simply melts away. Ladies, gentlemen, and others, my name is Arcada, and welcome to Glass Reflection, where today we will be reflecting on Frieren Beyond Journey's End. Let's jam. In attempting to figure out the order in which I wanted to talk about things, I decided it was probably best to discuss one aspect that I feel either gets ignored or put to the side in many online discussions of this show, despite, being in the title. Beyond a Journey's End is quite important because it's part of the underlying nature of the whole narrative, even if it's easily forgettable underneath the rest of the series. One of the major parts of Frieren's narrative is that of the hero's party, a very well-worn narrative aspect that's been around in pop culture since at least the 80s. This aspect sees a group of adventurers featuring a heroic swordsman, a stoic dwarven fighter, a holy priest, and an elven mage that team up together and travel across the land to defeat the evil demon king and his minions. But Frieren is not about that journey specifically, even if it features prevalently throughout the narrative. Like the show's title, the main story instead takes place after that journey, beyond its end, because the party of heroes has disbanded. Not because they failed, like some other tales of swords and sorcery, but because they actually succeeded. They won. The Demon King was defeated and our party has returned victorious. But one of the party members, Frieren herself, is an elf. And in this world, elves have seemingly infinite lifespans. The hero's party took about 10 years to travel and defeat the Demon King, but for Frieren, that's a drop in the bucket compared to the life that she has already lived, and a grain of sand in the lake of her future. It's the focus on that aspect of her character that is what drives things forward and sets it apart from other similarly themed shows. The last number of years has seen many an anime that like to fall back on the tried and true party of heroes, but very few ever bother with talking about the aftermath. Why would they? Some might think. The real story is over. The king is defeated. The world is at peace. There's nothing left. Oh, but there's plenty left if only you took the time to seek it out. The real narrative of Frieren follows the titular protagonist many decades after the fact. It's been so long since the party of heroes completed their journey that the hero himself has died of old age. The priest follows shortly thereafter, and the dwarf, well, he's still around, but is more or less in a dwarven version of relaxing retirement in his old age. Frieren has spent the last several intervening years pretty much doing what she has always been doing for a decent chunk of her life, traveling around aimlessly looking for lost tomes of legendary and unique spells to add to her collection. Sometimes she'll stay at a place for years at a time, because why not? She's not in a rush. But while she may spend a decade or longer in one location or another, she never really develops meaningful relationships with the people. Most of the population of this world seems to be humans with comparatively tiny lifespans. She can leave a village after spending some time with children there, and the next time that she decides to return to that village, those children could be long gone, and it's their great-grandchildren who she will meet instead. So it's hard to build a relationship with someone when, to her, their time together is so short. So she normally doesn't. It's not until the passing of the hero Himmel that Frieren really starts to look at herself and regret the lack of time that she has spent with those that she truly cares about. She has more time than anyone she knows, but after literal decades, she finally starts to feel regret at her lack of connections. So the second journey, the one beyond the first, is Frieren revisiting the path taken by the party of heroes to remind herself of what she was too apathetic to appreciate the last time around. So technically, the narrative is still telling the tale of a bunch of heroes defeating the Demon King or Lord or whatever, but it's told mostly in retrospect by one who was actually there. And it's that additional context of being in the past that makes the story of the heroes' party unique, and the grander story of Frieren's second party all the more memorable. It's like taking a vacation somewhere that you've never been before, and you bring a friend along with you, a friend who knows the area like the back of their hand, to be your guide. That's pretty much just like the overarching gist of this story in a nutshell. Frieren ends up building her own version of the hero's party, with Fern, the mage, who she somewhat adopts from the priest after his passing, Stark, the apprentice to the dwarven fighter, and briefly, Stein, a priest in search of his childhood friend, and also the loving company of a mature, older woman. Their journey takes them north along the same path that Frieren traveled previously, with stops along the way, but somehow not too many. So like normally when we talk about the pacing of a narrative or the pacing of an episode, it is done in a negative light. And that's because we usually only notice pacing when it's bad. Or at least that's the thing with me. The production team of any show can stretch things to pad time because, like, maybe we have X amount of episodes to make content for, or they can condense things to fit time, like if they want to reach a particular narrative beat quickly. Neither of these things are always enjoyable, especially when they are done poorly. But the pacing in Frieren is, I'm gonna be honest, it's some of the best that I've ever seen, and it's done at an episode-by-episode level. Most episodes of any anime have like a main A-plot that takes up the length of the episode. Even if the content of that narrative could easily be shown in less than 20 minutes, things will get stretched out to fill that time, and it'll feel like it's dragging a bit. Frieren, however, regularly has 2 separate plots in any individual episode, rather than taking one and stretching it out. Now, the fear there, then, is that the 2 narratives that are presented won't get any breathing room. Like, it'll just be go, 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 go to get to the next part, the next narrative beat, and it's a bit too fast-paced. But oddly enough, through what feels like magic, Frieren isn't like that at all. So many times while watching this series, I will look at the time code, and while I will have felt that I've experienced a full episode already, I will then realize we're only halfway through. 10 minutes feels like 20, but not because it's dragging or because it's taking too long to do things, but because everything is so tightly packed, and there's a bunch of unique moments within the episode to make it feel like so many things are happening even when they're not. But it's not so tightly packed that things feel like the plot is going like a mile a minute. There are plenty of examples in this show where we just pause and take a moment to appreciate the scene we are watching. It's like a perfectly timed tour of the narrative where every moment gets precisely the right amount of time to make it memorable. And then we move on to the next moment, not only with time to spare, but without any regrets or any lingering feelings that we are not appreciating the moments when they happen. I cannot tell you really when the last time was that I felt this way about a narrative. Because honestly, I can't remember the last time a show tried to properly pull off completely separate A and B plots like this. Most times, if you have an A and a B plot, they will occur simultaneously, and we just swap between viewpoints every other scene. But here, we get a brand new mini-story in each half of an episode. It's great! And the stories themselves remind me heavily of like other slow-paced and fantastical narratives, in a good way. Think like Mushishi and Kinog's Journey, where we have this world, this journey that the characters are on, but while the end goal is important, we can spend time at all of the stops along the way, and interesting things still happen there. Even if it's just like a bunch of character development because they get trapped in a cabin during a snowstorm for a month, twice. Because it's a fantasy, though, all of these stories have the possibility to be a little bit more fantastical, potentially involving like some kind of unique monster that puts you to sleep before trying to eat you, or another that will use your memories of long-lost friends to get you to lower your guard. But then there are also plenty of stories about seemingly mundane things, like Frieren and Fern spending a month cleaning up a village's shoreline so that one particular sunrise will be all the more memorable, or searching for weeks for a particular blue flower to make a field of them in front of the hero's statue. There's a particular emphasis on how fantastical the mundane can be, and it's just so interesting and refreshing to me here. Frieren herself seems to just embody that. While a typical mage might spend their time trying to become the most powerful, and their idea of legendary spells are the kind that level continents with a handful of words. In contrast, Frieren's idea of a legendary spell is one that can eliminate mold, clean moss and dirt off of bronze, or a spell to remove tough oil stains. These things sound so simple and mundane, like, are we not in a fantasy world? Aren't all of these things just a given? But I mean, like, we, the audience, live in a modern world where getting out tough oil stains is a serious pain in the neck, and it makes this world of Frieren feel so lived in that we just get details like this. Instead of, just saying, oh, magic can just fix that. It's magic. And I mean, yes, there is a spell for that, so magic does fix it. But like almost all spells in this world, they are uncommon. And it's not like there's a database of useful spells that everyone knows, at least not one that'll work on oil stains. Sure, most mages seem to know how to fly for a time, and blasting magic has become common through necessity, but everybody forgets about the mundane. Everybody except for Frieren. The mundane is not the only thing that she remembers, though. There are times when the party will meet other long-lived individuals, but some of them, like Old Man Vol, have long since forgotten the face of even their dear loved ones, such as the passing of time. But Frieren doesn't forget. That's what her journey is somewhat about, which brings us to the second subtitle of the show. Officially, the English subtitle of Frieren is Beyond a Journey's End, as we've talked about before. But if you wanted to take a more literal translation of the Japanese subtitle, you would get something closer to The Final Farewell to the Dead. I'm not entirely sure why the subtitle was made this way in English, but regardless, the other translation also fits the story perfectly well. But it does that while focusing on a completely different part of it. Beyond a Journey's End focuses on what comes after for the party of heroes. It is quite a large part of the overall narrative, thus fitting, but the final farewell to the dead is more focused on the ending of this second journey that we haven't even reached yet. The journey of Frieren's second party to the northernmost tip of the world, where the Demon King's castle now stands vacant. But it's also a journey to a place where one can find a path to heaven and speak to those who have long since passed on. Frieren is filled with such regret that she did not spend more time with Himmel, the hero, that she takes this journey with the slight hope that this heaven exists and that she can spend some more time with him. She only believes this to even exist because she is sent on this path via a memoir of her even longer dead mentor, who claimed to have gone there herself and urges Frieren to do the same. So the final farewell is Frieren traveling to heaven to properly say goodbye to Himmel. On reflection, though, I am kind of happy that the subtitle is what it is for the English release, mostly because I think it's more fitting for the story overall. Sure, the far reaches of the north is where our characters are eventually headed, but they're not there yet and probably won't get there for a long time, so why focus on it? It makes far more sense to focus on the here and now, for the characters to not rush towards the future, but appreciate what is in front of them. So let us do that for a moment and talk briefly about the show's characters more specifically. First and foremost is Frieren herself. There are many reasons to like Frieren as both a character and a protagonist, and for me, largely, it's due to her personality and the unique aspects of it that make her work really well in the protagonist role, even if it's only for just this story. In anime and a lot of Japanese media, there are some very popular character archetypes that you have probably heard of before, like the tsundere, where a character is overtly aggressive most times to other characters, but has a soft and gooey center once you get to know them. There's the yandere, where a character is nearly perfect in every way, barring their somewhat homicidal tendencies to protect the one that they have fallen in love with. The godere, where a character's passion for another goes so far as to completely ignore the wants and desires of said beloved person. A dandere, the extremely quiet and reserved partner who typically has some kind of social anxiety that manifests itself around people that they become fond with. And also the kudere, a calm and collected individual who rarely shows emotion, and since about the 90s and the release of one particular mecha anime, has been popular enough to manifest into characters that show virtually no emotion at all. All of these dere archetypes, and the ones that I didn't even mention, are typically used for love interests. Heck, tsundere was coined by an eroge light novel from 2001, but many of these archetypes can and have been applied to characters outside the context of a romantic relationship. While tsundere usually rears its head for characters that are aggressively denying their romantic interest for another character, there are plenty of other characters who do fit the description outside of a romantic context. But then there's the kudere, specifically the emotionless kudere. Famously popularized by Rei Ayanami, the emotionless kudere has many forms and evolutions that have occurred over the decades. And it is here that I believe Frieren not only sits, but excels as like a perfect example of how this particular archetype should continue to evolve moving forward. Too often, I find that writers take the emotionless aspect of a kudere character extremely literally. While this can work in many contexts, not only for like comic relief, but also for dramatic moments, see Yuki Nagato, the problem with this is that these characters make for poor protagonists. It's hard for an audience to truly relate to a character who, presumably, unlike them, has no emotions at all. Frieren does have emotions. It's just that as a long-lived elf, her emotions are broadcasted in a very different way from any other character in the series. Her main emotion is, well, apathy. She has lived for decades, to the point where the 10 years that she spent fighting the Demon Lord with the party of heroes was a literal drop in the bucket of her life. Time means very little to her, and if she was told that she just needed to sit and do some monotonous tasks for months or years just to get a single grimoire of an obscure spell, she would agree near instantly. She doesn't get angry, at least not visibly, nor does she get frightened or scared, because not much phases her. One could argue, that she is an extremely overpowered protagonist, and then you could paint her in a negative light because of that. Just like so many other overpowered characters in recent fantasy these days. But I would counter argue that one of the things that makes overpowered protagonists awful are the stories that surround them and how those stories emphasize things. Frieren rarely has a challenge as far as combat is concerned, but this story is not really all that combat focused. Even in the arcs where that becomes more prevalent, Frieren seems to take combat as more of a last resort, or an action that she continues with out of necessity, which ends up meaning she doesn't flaunt any kind of superiority that she may have. Though as powerful as she is, being able to identify and eliminate a powerful monster in less than 5 seconds if required, the series is quick to also point out and emphasize instead her flaws. While she has a near-perfect memory, it's her level of apathy that stops her from rushing things even if she remembers them. She might make friends and want to visit them, but it takes a few decades for her to do so. She might make a promise to return and kill a powerful demon that's been sealed away, but chances are she'll wait until right about when the seal is supposed to break on its own, and then she's just forced to handle it. She's never in a rush to do anything or go anywhere, which is fine for her, as it's not like she has a ticking clock of a lifespan, but her companions are a different story. The hero's party needed to kill the Demon Lord while they were still both alive and physically able to complete the task. Frieren's party is similar, as while they are young when they set out, a decade is a long time for a human, and that's the minimal amount of time it'll take for them to make their journey north and back, which places the young Fern in a more motherly position, having to take care of Frieren and force her to do things when she's too lazy or apathetic to do it herself. As for Fern, well, her and Stark really are both comparatively easier to get a handle on, as they haven't lived for millennia yet, and humans can be more relatable. Fern got orphaned at a young age, and through some trickery by the priest, was lucky enough to have Frieren teach her magic when she was young, for about 5 years or so. As such, the two of them are surprisingly similar in many ways personality-wise, but also extremely different in others. Fern values time far more, and after years of traveling with Frieren, has gone through waves of agitation with her more nonchalant attitude towards the journey in general and how much time is passing. She tries to be mostly as apathetic and emotionless outwardly as Frieren is, but her emotions poke through far more often the more time that we spend with her. She enjoys being coddled from time to time, even if she is more often in the position of mother with Frieren, and while she lovingly teases Stark and seems to show genuine affections for him, she doesn't really know how to handle their relationship besides just being fellow adventurers. Their relationship is actually one of the things that sets Fern apart the most from Frieren, as, while the narrative has yet to pull the trigger on a proper relationship between Fern and Stark, the chemistry is there. Unlike with Frieren, who views romance as interesting as a piece of sand thousands of miles away from her. And she's the one that actually likes mundane things. Fern is at her best, however, when she is allowed to show off. More often, she still acts like she's in training, an apprentice under the great mage Frieren, and she doesn't always have the most confidence in her own abilities, which is a real shame because when the narrative demands it, Fern is an absolute badass. Then we have Stark. Now, I'm not going to insult him by calling him the comic relief of the series, but to be fair, however, it is a role that the series seems far more comfortable to apply to him than the others. Unless a mimic is involved, because Frieren getting trapped in a mimic is a joke that just won't get old. Stark's reasons for traveling are the most vague comparatively. While Fern follows Frieren because she is largely the only family she has left, Stark is the more shonen-esque, I have to get stronger and prove to my master that I can be great, and so on and so forth. He started journeying with the other two because his master requested it. I mean, they also helped him slay a dragon because this is a fantasy series, so sometimes fantastical things happen, but still. As much as I hope that eventually Fern and Stark get together, I do see the writing on the wall as far as their relationship goes. More than likely, they will either never become a couple, but have the will they won't they situation milked for as long as the narrative can get away with it, or they will get together, but just not until their current journey is complete, as their union would massively affect the interpersonal relationships between everyone in the party and possibly just throw the whole journey out of whack. So wait, we shall. Doesn't make it any less frustrating, though. Stein is the last of the four, but since he's only there briefly, there's not much to add on with him. While we initially think he's there to round out the group, largely what the group is truly missing is not a healer like him, even if the narrative immediately goes to great lengths to showcase how the party could use one. No, the party is actually missing a charismatic face, like the hero. All four of them are socially awkward and uncharismatic to the populace at large. They can get by as adventurers and they're able to gain favor with most people that they interact with, but in the end, they all act to a degree like social introverts, which is great to see as a social introvert myself, but I can acknowledge where the flaws are in their group dynamic. Stein himself gets on a journey to find a childhood friend of his, and he travels with the group for a short while, but even during that time, he himself comments on how they aren't really a group, all that much. Like, they spent a month waiting out a storm, and during that time, they all seemed to just do their own things. The main difference is that they traveled together. It was hard for them to be lonely when they were doing it as a group. Unless, of course, you were wanting for a particular kind of company, like the company that only a mature older woman could provide. It is interesting flip-flopping between Frieren's party and that of the hero's party, because Frieren's group doesn't have a face character. It's almost symbolic in a way, because if they did have a face, then that person would be this party's Himmel. And as Frieren slowly is realized, there's no replacement for the hero. He's gone, and she's taking this journey to find him again. So of course they don't have him represented in the party's makeup. That seems to be intentional. How all these characters are presented and how they interact with the small stories that exist in every episode really does make the whole experience shine. As much as a lot of the credit for that goes with the original material, which the adaptation is strikingly faithful, the adaptation itself deserves so much credit as well. Which brings us to Madhouse. And my god, is that good to say. I mean, when I really think about it and also reference a list of all the anime that they have ever worked on, I know that it really hasn't been all that long since Madhouse has produced an anime of note. They make one that I consider to be like top list contender at least every other year. But for me, I feel like it's been a long time since a Madhouse series has been like a #1 favorite of mine. Yes, I know we should all be caring more about the creatives working at Madhouse during the time of production rather than the company itself, because it's not like those who worked on Frieren also were at Madhouse back in like the Death Note days. Shit, I didn't check that. Hold on. Okay, yeah, I checked. That is a correct statement. None of the main creative names that worked on Frieren also worked on Death Note. I'm okay. But like with Death Note, Frieren seems to be taking some similar cues, at least with how the studio goes about giving the director's chair to people. Granted, Frieren's director is not a newbie by any means. In fact, they have one series on their resume already. Bocchi the Rock. Damn, no wonder they got the introvert style down pat. And of course, the music for the series was handled by Evan Call, who knocked this soundtrack out of the park. I really am curious though, what makes some anime soundtracks work so much better than others? I really should just ask someone who could answer that properly, but I'm too much of an introvert to ping someone who could honestly answer my questions. Like back in the day, I used to think it was to do with the skill of the composers themselves. And while that obviously is a part of it, a great composer, I feel like, can be hampered by an unenthused production team. Mozart could still be alive and be a composer for an anime, but if the director and the other creatives really don't care about the show's music, it doesn't matter what he writes if it's not utilized properly. So as much as I can give credit to Call for this soundtrack, and we should give a lot of credit to Evan Call for this soundtrack, I'd also want to give props and many thanks to the members of the production staff who just let him go off and make some of his best work. I mean, I've complained previously about some shows not giving the soundtrack space to breathe, some of Evan Call's own works, no less. So it just surprises me so much that Frieren, this show that somehow seems to consistently fit 2 whole solid narratives into one episode, still finds time to let the music carry a scene and guide us to the emotional place that we need to be in. This series is just great for that. I am, though, of course, a little apprehensive about how this particular adaptation is going to end. I know I made jokes in my 2023 video about how I'm the guy who says that the ending is paramount and that this is an exception, but it's really not. I feel, however, that I know how the ending of this adaptation is going to go, though. It's going to continue through till probably the end of the Mage exam arc, and then it's just gonna stop. At least, I hope that's what happens, because even though I want it to keep going, it'll be hot on the heels of the manga by that point, and in danger of going an anime-only route, which would be worse. I'm not sure how else exactly the show could end, because there's no real good point in the upcoming story arcs for any kind of conclusion that would truly work. We can only hope that the end of an arc will suffice, and that eventually Madhouse or some other production company will pick the show back up in a handful of years for a season 2. After, they probably double dip and release either a recap OVA or a film, of course, because that seems to be the cool thing to do these days. Putting beside that apprehension, though, I am also fairly hopeful. With the skill that has been showcased thus far, I have little reason to believe that the adaptation will entirely throw us for a loop and tank my impressions of it in a single episode or so at the end. The chances of that are super low. At worst, I think that I will just be depressed when it's over, because it's not like we're gonna see our protagonists get to the far north in this season. And a second season? Well, the show's got enough acclaim and notoriety behind it that I would normally say additional seasons are for sure. But at this point, that's all just up to the mangaka and the publisher. I mean, just look at Haruhi and what happened when that popularity bomb went off. Nothing happened. The cliffhanger is real. It's been over a literal decade. Come on, please, Kyoto Annie, I'm dying here. When people ask me the most common question that any anime fan gets asked, what is your favorite anime? My response is that it keeps changing, and I like it that way. So many people, I find, end up picking a favorite anime and make that their thing forever. They make it part of their personality that stays with them for decades, and that can work for some people, but not for me. If I did that, I would be the guy who says that Dean Stay Night is my favorite anime ever, because that's what it was when I was 16. But man, would that be awkward, especially since, Zero has existed for over a decade now. I'm old. But changing my favorite every handful of years is great for me, because not only can I say that I am still watching my favorite anime right now, because I am, Frieren is still airing, but in the future, I know that my new favorite anime is still out there waiting to be made. There are plenty of anime that come out every year that I enjoy, some that I love even, but it's rare for me to find one that I can say that, yeah, no, this is my favorite right now. For reference, my last proper favorite was the original Laid Back Camp back in 2018. It's been a few years. I mean, Ascendance of a Bookworm has come close, and it is my favorite if we are talking purely about light novels rather than anime adaptations, at least until Wit gets their hands on it. But yeah, I can say, without any exceptions or additions, that Frieren is my current favorite anime. And that may stand for a number of years. It may not last this year, but at this moment, in the now, in the present, I can appreciate this series and the enjoyment that it has given me. This feeling won't last, but for the time being, I can be happy that I feel like this in the now. And with that, thank you for watching. Here at the end of the video, I want to give special thanks, of course, to my patrons, because yes, this video is not sponsored, and the more support that we get over there, the less sponsors that Glass Reflection will need at any given time. But a super special thank you, of course, to patrons Ryfen Bonaparte, Sailor Arashi, Omar Showman, Ross Emerson, Hector Montemayor, and City Yamako. You guys are all especially awesome, and I can't thank you enough. And now, if you excuse me, I have more anime to watch. So until next time, stay frosty.